The Sky Bet Championship has kicked off and it's not started well for my team, Derby County, but for some of yours, it may have started absolutely amazingly. If you have seen the length of this video and it sort of scared you a little bit, make sure you check the timestamps in the description to go and watch whichever match review you want to watch. Obviously, you may see me change top, I may have a different hat on and all that as this video goes on because I'm filming it in two parts and I'm just going to put them together as the games come through. Now, if you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for all my EFL Championship and League One matchday previews and reviews that are going to come out over the course of this season. We're going to try and stay up to date with all the latest and greatest news coming out of the Championship and League One. But to do that, you need to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to see what is going on. Now, before we get into it, every single fixture is timestamped down in the description, so make sure you check that out to see which games you want to watch first and go through it in an order like that. You don't have to watch it all in one go. Obviously, that would be helpful for the channel, but you don't have to watch it all in one go because obviously it's probably a long video. But obviously, go and check out the timestamps in the description. Go and watch whatever game you want. We're starting off with Derby versus Blackburn, and then we'll progress through the games across the weekend. Now, we're going to start off this video with my team, Derby County, who a lot of you will probably slander me in the comments because what an awful performance, and that is the best way that I can put it. If you do want to hear my full instant match reaction, I have got a Derby County versus Blackburn match review, which I posted a couple of hours after the game finished. It's a bit of a raw insight to the feelings I felt directly after the game and the thoughts I had, and I've been battered a bit on Twitter for some of the things I've said, and some people may not like it, some people do like it, but it's just one of those things. And I think Blackburn obviously have to have a lot of credit. Now, I think the 4-2 scoreline flatters Derby County because ultimately it could have been 5 or 6, and I think the 2 goals we scored, the Nelson one we scored when we was in a bit of control of the game, really good goal, well deserved. The Wilson one, a consolation goal, as you can imagine, after 88 minutes when you're 4-1 down, but it's good to get those goals on the board, obviously. Now obviously, if we look at the early statistics, it doesn't look as bad when you look at the possession, you look at the shots, but when you look at the two different sets of chances, 5 big chances to 1, 2.05 XG to 1.8, and then when we get a little bit deeper, you'll understand where my problems come from with this performance from Derby County. Now, if we look at the lineups, and we have to look at the bench of Blackburn compared to the bench of Derby, and that's where you're going to see my problem, because you've got a lot of players in this Blackburn Rovers side who walk into this Derby team. You look at Dolan, you look at Rankin, Costello, Guy, you look at Hedges, Travis, all probably walk into this team. Hyam, Carter, Britton, all probably get into this team at Derby County. And I'm not saying this Derby County team is bad, I'm just saying it lacks a ton of quality in depth wise, and that's just something which certainly needs to be looked at by Paul Warne. Now, at the point where Derby County scored, Guy had gone down with a bit of an injury, and obviously we then scored from the resulting corner. Mendes-Lang assists for both goals, which doesn't surprise me. He's got a brilliant delivery on him, and then this is where the game changed. The substitutions from John Eustace to bring on Sammy Szmodics, Andreas Weimann and Yuki Ohashi. It just blows my mind, because the best thing that we could bring on in an attacking sense was James Collins or Dejon Brown, and that's the question marks that Derby County obviously have this season, is do we have the quality off the bench? And I don't think we do, don't get me wrong. I think we've got players who can compete, but I don't think we've got players who can change a game. We had no creative spark off the bench. Ibu Adams, defensive minded, Liam Thompson, run around, Tyrese Forner, defensive minded, and Craig Forsyth, obviously a defender. So you look at the players we brought on compared to theirs, we had no chance of competing, really, in my opinion, and this is where it really needs to be looked at. Now, if we go and look at the statistics from the game, it doesn't look all that too bad when you look at 12 shots to 1 for Derby County. You look at the XG and it shows that the shots were a little bit worse, obviously. because it's the better type of chances equals better XG. And you look at shots on target, 7-4, but then you go to the next one, 5 big chances to 1, and they only missed 1 of their big chances, and it wasn't great. It wasn't great for Derby County, and we get down to the XG, and this is where my problem stems. It's a problem Derby County have had for the longest time under Paul Warne, in my opinion, is I don't think we create enough from open play situations. I think we have a habit of, instead of looking for the midfielder, asking for the ball, we go to the wide man, go to the fullback, and we just go around the pitch instead of through the pitch, and we can't create those open play opportunities by dragging people into the middle of the park to get it out wide, to get it back in. And it's one of those where you look at the numbers here, 2.01 XG to 0.33 in open play, 0.75 to 0.04 on set plays, which I think just shows where Paul Warne's focus is for this Derby County team this season. It's certainly going to be set pieces. It's going to be interesting if Derby County bring in some extra players, because by God, do they need it? And I think as a Derby County fan, I can certainly say that now. Blackburn Rovers obviously need their additions as well, and obviously that could be Schmoddick's final act as a Blackburn Rovers player. We don't know what's going to happen with him. Obviously, when you see this video, it may happen. I'm recording this on the Saturday. Obviously, there's still fixtures to play on Sunday and Monday for the Championship. I'm going to try and get everything recorded sort of bit by bit, so it's all ready to go out on Tuesday morning when all the fixtures have been played. So shall we get into the next one then? Now, Sheffield United started off their season in impressive fashion with a 2-0 win versus Preston North End. Oni Arblaster picking up a brilliant goal. Same with Gustavo Hamer. Now, Arblaster is a player who was linked with Derby County last January, a player who has real good quality, and I certainly think he's going to get his opportunity this season, because obviously they're lacking a few players there at Sheffield United. Now, you look at like the basic statistics here, 46% to 54 in possession, 0.74 to 0.78, 12 total shots to 11. It doesn't look like that much of a different game. Now, you look at obviously the two teams that were put out by both sides, and I do think that Sheffield United team is really good, but I also think that the Preston North End team certainly does have quality. You look at the likes of Lindsay at the back, you look at Thordarson in midfield, who certainly didn't have his greatest performance on his Championship debut. They've obviously got Greenwood, who they've brought in from Leeds, also not his greatest performance on debut. And then you've got Emil Rees Jakobsen up front, and Keane as well, who certainly didn't have their finest hours. Now, you look at this Sheffield United side, and I think they've got some absolute Championship cheat codes in Moore, Robinson, Hamer. I think they're cheat codes at this level. Callum O'Hare, another player who I think is going to be fantastic this season. Obviously, you look at Harrison Burrows, who's only going to get better with better players around him, and it's certainly going to be an interesting season for Sheffield United, who I think are probably going to do my prediction very well. Now, I think it was an interesting game. Obviously, I didn't watch through a lot of it because I was watching the Derby game, but the bits I've seen, I thought Sheffield United were really good. 3 shots on target, one big chance missed, but obviously they've got they picked their opportunities, they took their opportunities, scored some nice goals, and Preston weren't able to fight back. And it's one of those for me where Preston North End probably have been fighting above budget for a long time, and maybe this season it's going to come back down to them, but we'll have to see as the season progresses. It's one of those for me where Preston North End could now go on a run, but they also might not, and Sheffield United, I think, are going to have a fairly good season. I think when I made my predictions, they were still having their problems off the pitch, were struggling to bring players in. I think they'd not long brought Burrows in, but they were still needing obviously more additions. So it's going to be interesting to see how they obviously develop over the course of the rest of this season. Now, Sunderland got off to an excellent start. I've seen a few people putting them forward to be potential automatic promotion contenders this season, and O'Neill and Clark picking up the goals in that win for them versus Cardiff City. Now, if we do look at the statistics early doors, 64% to 36% possession. So Cardiff City certainly had more of the ball, but Sunderland made the most of theirs with 1.7 XG to 0.9 in Sunderland's favour. 12 shots to 11, 2 big chances each. Obviously, Sunderland took theirs. Now, we look at these two sides, and I think obviously, I think Cardiff City have some really, really good players. You look at Aaron Ramsey, you look at Chris Willock, Robinson. I think there's some really good players within that side. But then you also look at this Sunderland side, and it's breathing potential. Joe Bellingham, potential. You look at Hume at the back, Sirkin, potential. Patterson, potential. Clark, potential. Roberts is sort of at that stage now where he's sort of really found his level, in my opinion, and he's been having some really good seasons for them. Obviously, maybe not over the course of last season he had a couple of injuries, but they've certainly been a fairly good team over the course of their spell together, and it's going to be interesting to see how they progress. Now, we look into the data a little bit more, and obviously you'll say, well, Cardiff City were the better side, they had more possession, they had more control of the game, but ultimately what matters in football is the scoreline. And I'm not saying that at a championship level you can't do what Cardiff City did in this game and dominate the ball and win games that way, because obviously you can. But Sunderland was certainly the team to make the most of it. With 11 shots, 4 on target, 2 of them obviously going in. And if we look at the data for Sunderland, 0.99 XG from set pieces, 0.71 from open play. Certainly going to be an interesting season for them. I'm really interested to see how they obviously progress over the course of the season. You look at the likes of Joe Bellingham, who's bringing in championship, top-end championship and Premier League interest, and is certainly a player to look out for this season. So if Sunderland are a team you've got on your bingo card to go up, I think you might be in luck. We go on now to look at Hull City versus Bristol City, and it's sort of a difficult one to talk about, this one, because obviously both teams have had a lot of changes this off-season, mainly with Liam Manning being able to put in his style of play properly now with Bristol City, whereas Hull City removed Liam Rosenior, brought in a new man. They've obviously lost some big players this off-season as well, which I went through in my championship preview. Now, you look at the early data for this game and you probably think it's a fairly even game, and I'd agree with you, and I think a draw is probably exactly what should come from this game, with 1.6 XG to 1.25, 11 shots to 15, 2 big chances to 1. It's quite an interesting one for me. You look at 46% possession at 2, 54% possession, and then if you go and look at the lineups, and this is where it's really going to hurt me, because you've got Jason Knight captain in Bristol City next to Max Bird in midfield. It's an interesting one because you look at the two sides. You look at this Hull City side, you look at Giles, you look at Estupinian, you look at Omer, Simmons, Slater, some really good performers for them, and ultimately that's one of the reasons why they came away with a point today. But you look at that Bristol City side, Dickey, Viner, Tanner, some really good players. Now, Knight and Bird on this website have been rated in the okay range, but on other websites they've been given like 7.5 and 7.2, and I think this is what's going to really hurt Derby County fans this season, is you're going to see players like Bird and Knight in possessional football systems where they're going to be really good, and that's something which Derby haven't done for the past 2 years. We haven't played possessional football. We haven't played to the strengths of our midfielders, and that is one of the reasons why Max Bird has moved on. It's one of the reasons why Jason Knight has moved on, and it's going to be obviously interesting to see how it progresses. Obviously, we lost Louis Sibley as well at Derby County, and you look at these players now that are going on to play in championship teams, and you obviously look at the way they played in possession today. Obviously 387 accurate passes for Bristol City, controlling the ball with 54% possession as well, taking the lead after 84 minutes. It's a really good performance for Liam Manning's side. If we look at the XG as well, 1.67 to 1.25. They dominated in open play with 1.19 to 0.72, and it's just one of those for me where it's going to be really interesting to see how it obviously progresses over the course of the season for Bristol City, because I do think that Liam Manning could be the man to sort of take them to that next level. Obviously, there's a long way to go for them before they get to that next level. They still need to add a bit of talent and depth to their team, I think. Obviously, like Naki Wells is a brilliant player, but he's coming towards the back end of his career. You look at, obviously, they've got Hayden Roberts, Gardner Hickman, who can come off the bench, Harry Cornick, but there's still a little bit more which I think is needed for Bristol City to be able to become a proper contender in this division and obviously compete with those parachute payments and things like that. I think they'll know that they'll be happy with probably a top 10 finish, maybe even a top 12. But Bristol City fans, let me know down in the comments. Obviously, Hull City, with your new manager in charge, how's it gone? Were you impressed with the performance? Were you disappointed? Obviously, Liam Rosenior would have probably had you playing a completely different way, so it's going to be interesting to see how you take to this new style and system. Are you going to be able to challenge for the playoffs again this year? Now, this is probably the game that I'd call the most championship game so far. A 3-3 draw. Leeds United, favourites for promotion versus newly promoted Portsmouth, and I think what we saw in this game was the reason why Portsmouth got promoted and why John Messinho is so highly rated down there, because it was an excellent performance and they were very, very unlucky not to win this game. Now, if we do look at the momentum, at the charts, at the data, it tells you that Leeds were the better side, and you watch the game, Leeds were the better side, but Pompey were never ever out of the game, and that's the most important thing. Now, 3.2 XG to 0.89, 68% possession to 32%, 22 shots to 5 big chances to 2. Very, very interesting one for me as we mull over this one, because you look at the difference in quality between players. You look at the wingers of Lane and Lang versus Nonto and James. You look at the 10 and 9 for Portsmouth of Sorensen and Silvera compared to Ruta and Joseph, and the quality between these two teams, like, it's tenfold different, and it's crazy to look at how well Pompey did. And I think this is where newly promoted Derby are going to struggle, in the fact of I don't think they're going to go at teams, and it may change as the season progresses, as Paul Warne gets more comfortable or maybe even moves on. But it's one of those for me where if you're going to beat these teams, you've got to go at them. You've got to put them under pressure. And I think Pompey did that really, really well. They let them have the ball in certain areas, but they press triggered in others. And that's the most important thing for me, is that they made the most of their opportunities. They scored an excellent goal. I want to say it was Lang who scored it. It was a really, really nice finish from outside the box into the top corner. And they scored a penalty late on as well, which is obviously interesting one. So obviously we look into the statistics, and obviously you can see where the Pompey goal came from, outside the box. I want to say it was Callum Lang. Could be wrong. Let me know down in the comments. But 3.2 XG to 0.89, as I've already said. 22 shots to 5, 10 on target to 4, 5 big chances to 2, 4 big chances missed to none. Obviously, Leeds were dominant in possession of the ball, dominated all the XG statistics. Of course they did. But the important thing for Pompey was they took their chances. And that's something which they did last season, which won them the league, was in games where they weren't in it, if they had a chance, they took it. And if they can keep that going throughout this season, they'll easily finish in that mid-table position. Obviously, this is just game one. It runs off adrenaline for game one. Some teams struggle, some teams go the other way and do really, really well. And Portsmouth and Oxford are two teams who did really, really well for their opening day. Derby County, not so much. So obviously, Pompey fans, Leeds fans, let me know your thoughts down in the comments on this one. I think Leeds were quite unlucky to take a point from this one, despite the fact they were dominant in the game. I think Pompey were able to sort of keep them at bay for large majorities, despite all the chances they had and opportunities. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Now, Middlesbrough fans are going to be delighted with a 1-0 win over Swansea City. A penalty in the 25th minute, which is one which they'll certainly be delighted with. 2.69 XG to 0.45. A lot less of the ball. Letting Swansea have the ball, but not really creating a great deal. 18 shots to 5. Having 5 shots on target, despite having 64% of the ball in 90 minutes, is poor. It is very poor. They even created 0 big chances to Middlesbrough's 5, and this is something which I think is going to be a common theme for Swansea, because you look at this Middlesbrough side and yes, it's really good. They've got some really good players in there. Matt Clark, Vandenberg, Hackney, Azaz, obviously Luke Ayling, Isaiah Jones, Lath up front. Some really, really good players. You look at the Swansea side again, some good players in Cullen, Fulton, Grimes, Darling, Cabango. They have some good players in there. But ultimately, Swansea, for me, are really good on the ball until they have to create an opportunity. Now, they're probably going to end up beating Derby 5 or 6-0. But it's one of those for me where Swansea City are going to be that team where they have a lot of the ball, they do a lot with the ball, but not a lot, if that makes sense. They get into good areas, go backwards. Good areas, go backwards. And I think that shows in the XG and the lack of shots. 0.45 XG from 64% possession is ridiculous when you consider 2.69 from 36% possession. So it's one of those for me where this is where Paul Warne will turn around and say, well, we don't need to play possessional football at Derby County. And I will always keep going back to Paul Warne and Derby, whether I'm doing League One or Championship, because obviously Derby's my team. It's what I can relate to the most. So you look at 466 passes on 85%, and it's the 238 passes on 76% which wins the game. Now, you look at the expected goals, more created from open play, more created from set pieces, more non-penalty XG. And I think Swansea fans this season are they're going to be stressed. I don't know if they're going to be down the bottom. I can't say that. Obviously, I've made my predictions. If you want to go and check them out, obviously go ahead and do that. They may start to look stupid as the season progresses, but right now, I think Swansea are going to be really disappointed with this game, dominating the ball, losing 1-0 to a penalty as well. Obviously, I think if it wasn't a penalty, Middlesbrough probably would have found a way to score anyway, because it was a really, really good performance by them. But for me, it's one of those where they still have a lot where they still need to progress at Swansea. They still need some new players through the door. Middlesbrough, the same. Obviously, I think they still need some players through the door. But ultimately, I think it's going to be interesting to see Middlesbrough. I get to see them next week at Pride Park on Saturday. It's going to be interesting to see them in the flesh because obviously I've heard a lot of great things about Michael Carrick. I've watched them a lot over the course of the last couple of years, with Derby being in League One, not having many games on Sky and things like that. So it's sort of been Middlesbrough been one of the teams I've watched because they've always been a fairly good watch, whether they win or lose. So it's one of those for me where I think it's going to be an interesting season for Middlesbrough, and I think Swansea City might really struggle. Now, if you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below or in this top corner to stay tuned for all of my latest Derby County and EFL, League One and Championship previews, reviews and news videos, which will be heading your way over the course of this season. There's obviously a lot to digest in this opening weekend, and if you've not seen your favourite team yet and you just want to get to it, make sure you check the description for the timestamps. You'll have the timestamp for when that game is in the video, so make sure you go and click on that to see your favoured video, then come back and watch the rest of it, and I'll catch you in the next part of this video. The next one then, and we're looking into Watford versus Millwall. Now this one ended in a victory for Tom Cleverley with his Watford side, a late winner in the 90th minute after Millwall equalised with Watmore in the 88th. And what an interesting game this was. It's another peak Championship game, and one which I think will live long in the memory of those Watford fans, especially given some of the things that have been said about them over the course of the last couple of months and the last couple of weeks, and especially what's been said about their manager in recent times. Now, if we look at the facts of this game and we look at some basic numbers to start off with, Millwall created the much better chances with a 2.0 XG compared to the 1.12 of Watford, and Millwall also able to possess the ball a little bit more with 54% to 46. They also created more big chances with 7 big chances to 2, 16 total shots to 10, and this is where this game gets really interesting because Watford were quite clearly the more clinical of the two sides. They scored directly from a corner as well, which was a very, very impressive goal and something which you do not expect to see at this sort of top level. But it's not the first time it's happened at Championship level, and it certainly won't be the last. Obviously, if you watch the games on Friday night, Nathaniel Mendez-Lang also nearly did the same to the Blackburn Rovers goalkeeper. Now, if we look at these two sides, now there is some very, very good Championship players in here. You look at Bryan at left back. You look at Saville in the midfield, Hutchinson, Honeyman, Watmore. some players in that Millwall side who I think are really, really good at this level. And I think Jensen in between the sticks, I think he's certainly going to grow into being a top-level championship goalkeeper. You then look at the side available for Watford, and you look at Sissoko. Yes, he's 34 years old, but he's still a very, very good football player. You look at Kiambi in the middle of the park. You look at Pollock and Bachmann. Some very, very good players in that Watford side too. Now, you can also look at the benches of the two sides with Thomas Ince coming off the bench for Watford, Ken Sema as well. You look at the Millwall bench with Macaulay Langstaff coming off, Dan McNamara. Some really, really good players in these two sides that are managed by Neil Harris and Tom Cleverley. And I think if we do go to look at the deeper numbers within this game, you'll see that Watford were just much more clinical within this game, and ultimately that's the importance of the Championship. You have to be clinical in your nature when you are in front of goal, and Blackburn showed on Friday that if you're clinical, you can win a game quite comfortably. And you look at some of the other games across the weekend as well. You look at Pompey took their chances and ultimately got a draw from Leeds United away from home. You look at Oxford United, who also picked up a win as well by being clinical with their chances and really shutting Norwich down. And if you look here, Watford had 10 shots and 5 on target. 3 of them ended up in the back of the net, whereas Millwall had 16 shots, 4 on target, with only 2 ending up in the back of the net. And they also missed 5 big chances. Now, it's one of those games for me where I think sort of this won't be a common feature for Millwall or Watford. I think on another day, Millwall would have won this game. But it's one of those for me where Watford, again, were clinical. They took their chances, and that's the important thing in this division. That's what gets you safety. That's what gets you promotion, and that's what gets you in the playoffs or even mid-table, depending on where you're trying to finish in the league. And it's certainly a great start for Tom Cleverley at Watford. I'm not surprised by the result, but I am sort of surprised by Watford in a way. I thought that with Tom Cleverley as the new manager and obviously the things that they've got going off behind the scenes, I did think it might have been a bit more of a struggle for them, but they've certainly done really well in this one. They've started off strong. Will they be able to continue it into their next championship fixture? Now, we did mention Oxford in the previous game, but let's talk about it properly now with Harrison Brannigan stepping up in the Championship to win 2-0 versus Norwich City in a game which I think has shown a lot. And as a Derby County fan who who came up and Oxford followed us through the playoffs, it's one of those where I really do think that you look at the performances of Oxford and Pompey and you look at the performance of Derby and it doesn't show who finished where in the league. Because if you remember, in League One last season, Oxford finished in 6th place, just scraped the playoffs. 5th place, scraped the playoffs. But they were really, really good in this game against Norwich, and came away as 2-0 winners. It had to be Cameron Brannigan to step up with that second goal, and it's one of them for me where neither side were really sort of dominant. It was a very even game, and when I go back to the previous game which I was talking about, Millwall and Watford, I spoke about the clinical nature of this division, and if you are clinical you will be successful. And you look at it here, 0.91 xG with 2 goals scored compared to a 0.83. They had 12 shots to 10, 3 big chances to 0, 51% possession to 49% possession. And as you can see, towards the tail end of the game, it was all Norwich. They were all over Oxford, but Oxford were able to hang in and keep the clean sheet as well as a 2-0 win. Now, if you look at this team, they've got some really, really good players in here. You look at the new signing of Volks. You look at Plaqueta on the left-hand side, new signing. Maybe didn't get off to the greatest start this weekend, but certainly will improve as the season goes on. You look at Rodriguez as well in the middle of the park with Cameron Brannigan, obviously Harris up front. And this Oxford side isn't necessarily a brilliant team. It isn't a brilliant squad of players, but they work really hard together. They're very aware of what their tactical situation is. And I think Des Buckingham did a tactical overview of how they set up for the Bolton playoff final. And it was really interesting to hear how in-depth he went and things like that. And Then you go on to look at this Norwich side, and you look at the likes of Sargent, Nunes, Sainz, McLean, Gibbs, Hanley, Duffy, some very, very impressive players within this team, and it just wasn't enough. And I think it shows the level that Oxford United are at and what they're growing to. And obviously, within this game, they didn't use many of their new signings. A lot of them were still on the bench. Obviously, Mizuni came off the bench, but you look on the bench still, you've still got the likes of Kioso and Louis Sibley and Malcolm Ebiowi still sitting on the bench. And you look at all 5 subs used by Norwich as they were looking to claw back themselves into this game. Now, if we look at the statistics of the game in a bit more detail, you can see 12 shots, 4 on target, 3 big chances, 2 missed for Oxford. You look at it on the other side for Norwich, and it's 10 shots, 2 on target, 0 big chances. Now, even if you look at the passing, Oxford passed the ball. They were more accurate with their passes, with 412 compared to 402, and I think that shows something with this Oxford side, that they're not going to be ran over by teams that last season were at the top of the division. Now, if you look, Oxford United were dominant within open play, whereas Norwich were sort of getting more joy from set pieces, and that's something which really needs to be addressed by Norwich City. They need to be able to open teams up, especially when you look at a team like Oxford United, who are newly promoted and probably there to be got. And I just don't think Norwich City were good enough. It's certainly something which they're going to have to address heading into future games this season if they do want to become playoff or even promotion contenders. Now, starting off game 1 with a loss doesn't mean you can't go on to win promotion, but it also does make it a little bit more difficult. So let's see what Norwich City can do in the future. Let's see what moves are in store in the transfer window for both of these two sides as things progress. But shall we now get into the next game? Now on to QPR versus West Bromwich Albion. And this is a result which I thought West Brom would win the game. I believe I said that in the preview. But QPR, certainly I didn't think it would be a 3-1 defeat. Now, Marti Cifuentes ended the season brilliantly with QPR, and I really thought he'd carry on that sort of form, and unfortunately heading into this game they haven't, with a 3-1 loss to West Brom. Maja picking up a hat-trick on the opening day, and what a good hat-trick it was as well. Now, if we do go on to look at the statistics of the game, it's no shock that West Brom won the game. They dominated the ball, they were clinical, they created more big chances, and despite not having many shots in general over the course of the game, the ones they did have, they made the most of. And you look at the difference in XG, 1.49 to 0.85 from 7 shots over 11, and that's a really interesting one for me. And you can see that if you look at the momentum chart, you can see that for the majority of the game, it is white. It is West Bromwich Albion really to lose, and it was a really, really good performance by them, in my opinion. Now, if we look at the two lineups, now for me, there could be a situation for West Brom later down the line where there could be a situation with Joe Wildsmith and Palmer between the sticks, but we'll have to see how that progresses for them. Now, you look instantly at the goalkeeper for QPR in Nardi, and you look at his rating of 4.8, and that obviously is not great. And if we look why, it's 3 goals conceded, as we already know, and we look, and it's just not a great performance by Nardi, really, was it? Conceding those goals, it wasn't great. Now, you look at the back four that they used, you look at Cook, you look at Clark, Salter, Dunn, and you even look to the midfield of Colback, and you think, is this team really as good as some people think it is? And I personally think that although they have quality in this QPR side, it's not quite where it should be. Now, it has been reported over the weekend that Karamoko Dembele will be joining QPR for a fee of around £3 million. I do think it's an interesting one. Obviously, there was reports of him going to Derby, Sheffield Wednesday, Birmingham, all a group of clubs that were interested. and I do think he would add that extra dimension for QPR this season. Now, if we look to the West Brom side, you look at obviously Madger up front will take all the plaudits with his hat-trick, but you look at some of the players they've got in Fallows, in Grant, Mowat, Malumbi, Adji at the back, you look at Furlong as well, and in my opinion these are all really, really top quality Championship players, and I think this West Brom side are going to do really, really well this season. They've shown it to start off with this season. I think Alex Mowat's an incredible midfielder. I think Carlon Grant, if you get him in the right positions, he is an absolute bagsman at this level. Now, if we do go on to look at the statistics between the game, and you look obviously at these initial ones straight away, you go 4 shots on target, 3 goals for West Brom. That is not going to happen every week, but you look at the shot map on the right hand side, all their shots are in their box and all the goals come from pretty much the same area, and that's something which certainly will need to be addressed by QPR in their upcoming games to make sure that does not happen again. Now, you look at QPR and it's a bit more all over the shot. Yes, there's a lot of shots in the box, obviously that's where their goal came from, but it just was not good enough. Now, if we obviously go down and look at the performance ratings for XG across the board, and West Brom only created 0.06 XG from set plays, which I think is really interesting. It shows that they've got more of a focus on creating from open play, and I think that's going to be a big theme of the Championship this season, and I think the only clubs you're really going to see sort of try and dominate that sort of set play XG is going to be the teams like Derby County with Paul Warne in charge, and teams like that who are sort of trying to play percentages. And ultimately, I think within this division, I think you can come up stuck with that mindset of we need to score from a set play, because you've got to create an open play as well. And I think that's what West Brom did brilliantly in this game, coming away 3-1 winners, and a very, very important result for West Bromwich Albion. Now it's time to look at Stoke City and Coventry City. Now, Coventry City have started off on the back foot this season with a 1-0 loss to Stoke at the Bet365, with Baker picking up the goal, and it's a really good performance from Stoke in my opinion. Now, they were higher on XG, they had more shots, more big chances, but all throughout the game it was very, very even, and it's one of those for me where I think we're going to see a lot of this in the Championship. You've got a lot of teams that are sort of on a level keel, and I think Stoke City and Coventry really show that this season. Now, there's obviously been a lot of changes within Stoke City over recent years, and obviously Steven Schumacher is now the manager there. And you look at the way they played and the way they set up, and it's very reminiscent of those days where he was at Plymouth Argyle. Obviously, this is more of a 4 than a 5, but ultimately the same principles apply. I think it's really interesting to see Tezgel up front getting a start in the league, and I thought in his performance he was fairly good for saying he's quite a young player as well. You look at Laurent in the middle, I think he's really good, put in a really good performance, and you look at the 2 experienced defenders of Gibson and Wilmot, and I think they also put in a really, really good performance. Now, obviously it will progress throughout the course of the season for both sides, but you look at the Coventry City side and they just don't quite look as if they were at the races. You look at Mason Clark, you look at Sakamoto, and they just weren't quite there. And that's something which will obviously progress over the course of this season. They'll all find ways to work with each other and to build from the back and build throughout the team. And obviously Rudani didn't have a greatest debut ever, and that's just something which will obviously grow with the club. Now, obviously, you look at the bench and you can see the players that are coming off Mark Robins' bench with Thomas Asante, Haji Wright, Casey Palmer, 3 really, really good players. But you can also say the same for Stoke with Niall Ennis, Lewis Baker and Daniel Johnson, some really, really good Championship players in there. And if we do go to look at the more in-depth statistics of this game, you can obviously see why it was the way it was. It was a very, very even performance. Coventry City obviously having more of the ball, but it was one of those really where they weren't really able to get into the best possible positions to create really, really good chances. And it was one of those games where if we do look down towards the XG, yes, both teams have a focus on sort of creating the best possible chances, but it looks as if Coventry City was sort of playing for those set plays, and that's where they got the most joy in this game, and that's why they have 0.4 xg to 0.34 in the set play department. And you look at Stoke and they created their best possible chances within open play, and that's something which I think we're going to see this season, is the teams that can dominate in open play are going to be the teams that are going to win games. And that's something which I'm obviously looking forward to see. Obviously more of the top end clubs like your Burnleys, your Lutons, your Leeds, because I think they're going to be really, really interesting to watch. And if you do obviously go back to the review part of this video for Portsmouth versus Leeds, and you look at how important the back four was in that game from Leeds, you look at obviously Bogle and Firpo, who play on the other side, two very, very attacking defenders who created an abundance of chances in that game. And that's something which I think we're going to see a lot of this season, is an abundance of chances being created on either end of the pitch for both sides, because it's going to be a very, very even division for sort of, especially at that top end. So obviously let me know your thoughts on performances and results down in the comments. I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say. We've got 2 games left: Sheffield Wednesday versus Plymouth, and then Burnley versus Luton. Now, I wanted Wayne Rooney to get off to a good start with Plymouth Argyle, and ultimately the performance we saw yesterday was one that he obviously wasn't impressed with. You listen to his post-match media and he was not happy, and watching the game you can completely understand why. 4-0 thrashing, and really that's probably light on Plymouth. It could have been a lot more. Like Sheffield Wednesday had so many chances throughout the game, and it's one of those for me where there was a lot of Plymouth Argyle players that weren't really tracking back, weren't trying to block crosses, weren't chucking their body on the line essentially. And if I go back to Wayne Rooney's time at Derby County, that was something which was like a no-brainer. Like, that's what you got every single week from every single player. They'd put their body on the line. They'd like chuck themselves in front of shots. They'd do whatever they can to block crosses. And don't get me wrong, at Derby County, a lot of people say he was unsuccessful, but I think that was his most successful season in management, because we should have stayed up without the deduction. And I think it's time now for Plymouth to sort of, is Wayne Rooney the problem, or are the players unwilling to work for Rooney? That's where this discussion starts. And I know it's early doors in the season, but you look at the work rate of some of the players, especially someone of the ilk of Morgan Whittaker, who was the talisman last season, and you look back at some of the goals, and where is he in the defensive end of the pitch? And he's not there, and he's not working to get back in. And that's something which will have to be addressed. Obviously, in some teams you do have those players who have that free role, that freedom on both ends of the pitch, defensively and going forward. And judging by the comments made after the game from Wayne Rooney, I don't think Whittaker has that freedom and responsibility under Rooney, and that's something which is going to have to be addressed for them in upcoming games. Now, let's get on to Sheffield Wednesday, because they were dominant. They were absolutely brilliant, and I think Danny Roll has a lot of praise coming his way if he can continue these types of performances over the course of the season. Obviously, new signing Jamal Lowe picking up a goal early doors after about 35 minutes. A really unfortunate own goal for Galloway put them 2-0 up, with Windass scoring in the 82nd and Smith in the 96th. But it was a really good game to watch, and it was really interesting to see how the game went, because I was expecting more from Plymouth. And like, I think a lot of the things I was thinking watching the game, Rooney addressed after the game, and that's obviously going to be really interesting to see how that goes over the course of the season, because you look at obviously these initial numbers from the game, and it's not great, is it? 59% possession to 41, 4.59 xg to 0.23, 30 total shots to 5, 7 big chances to 0. And I think a lot of the problem with that Plymouth Argyle performance was, if you look at Morgan Whittaker, and when he got on the ball, there could be a pass on and he'd just whack it from 20, 30 yards. And fair enough, you scored some bangers last season, and you've scored some bangers in your career, not only at youth level but also at senior level now. But you can't be doing that. Not when you're 1-0 down, not when you're 2-0 down, certainly not when you're 3-0 down. You've got to try and get back into the game. And I think that was the big problem with this performance from Plymouth Argyle. Now, I do sort of agree with FOTMob here that Sissoko was the best player on... Sissoko and Hazard were the two best players for Plymouth, because I thought without Hazard it probably could have been a lot more. And I think Sissoko was the brightest spark on the attacking end. I thought everyone else sort of might as well have not been there, really. Now, if we do obviously talk about this Sheffield Wednesday performance, I thought the performance from Deshaun Bernard showed why so many clubs were interested in him this summer. Obviously, the likes of Barry Bannon, like, we know what he's capable of, and it doesn't surprise me that he put in such a great performance. I think Ingelsson, I'm pretty sure he's a brand new signing, and he had an amazing performance. And obviously Jamal Lowe and Windass in those forward areas were pretty much unstoppable by Plymouth. And you look at Valerie at the back as well. I thought he had a really, really good performance. And then you just look to the bench that Sheffield Wednesday can go to with Marvin Johnson, Kabaki, Valentin, Smith, Palmer, all really, really impressive players. And I'm not saying that Wayne Rooney didn't have good players at his disposal too, because you've got one of the best performers from last season in Morgan Whittaker playing the game, and it's really difficult to look at this game and sort of give Plymouth any praise, because it was terrible. It was awful. And obviously Wayne Rooney is going to be wanting more, and one shot on target all game is awful. 5 shots in 90 minutes. It's not even like creating a chance every, like a shooting opportunity every 10 minutes. It's awful. You look at 30 shots for Sheffield Wednesday and just look where the majority of those 30 shots are, all within the box, apart from probably 7 or 8. And well, it might not even be 7 or 8 really, it might be 6, but like, it's massively, massively impressive of the performance Sheffield Wednesday put in. And if you look at where they were and where they started this time last season, it's massive, the improvement that they've made. Now, dominant across XG, but what do you expect when you've taken 30 shots, the majority of them are all within the box? You even look at the set play XG, it's 1.33. And you look, they had 15 corners to 1. And it's difficult to talk about this game, because I really like Wayne Rooney. I think with the right environment, the right people around him, he could be a really good manager. I just think the problem is the players have got to see that too. And I think there's obviously been a lot of discussion about Wayne Rooney over the course of the last few years. Obviously, with the relegation at Derby and walking away as they went into League One, which I think was more of a mutual decision than we are led to believe. Obviously then his spell at DC didn't exactly go to plan, but I'm led to believe there was behind the scenes problems there as well. Obviously you then go to Birmingham City, where he was dealt a shit hand to start off with. You come in and replace someone who's got him in the top 6, and then you have the toughest run of fixtures that they've had all season. Now, would John Eustace have done better in those games? Maybe, but it was just one of those things. It just didn't work. And it's one of those for me where they've got to get better. And they will win a game or two under Rooney, and it's going to be a long season for Plymouth. Will he last the season? That's a big question on people's lips at the moment, and we will find out on this channel as the season progresses. But let's get into the final game, that is Burnley versus Luton. Well, it's time to talk the final game of the weekend, and that is Luton Town versus Burnley. And it did not exactly go to plan for Rob Edwards in their home return to the Championship, losing 4-1 to Scott Parker's Burnley in what really was a very, very interesting game in my opinion. As much as the scoreline reflects that Burnley were the dominant side, I think there was periods of play where it was a very, very even game, but Burnley were for sure the more clinical of the two sides. Now, both of these sides were relegated from... both of these two sides were relegated from the Premier League last year, and that is why this game was such a intense one, and one which you were all needed to watch. I think it was a very, very impressive performance from Burnley. I think Scott Parker has shown yet again why he is called a championship promotion specialist. You have Paul Warne, who's the League One Guardiola. You've got Scott Parker, who is that championship specialist. And you look at these basic numbers of 58% possession to 42 and a 1.09 XG to 1.18 with 10 shots to 11. 2 big chances to 4. Luton to Burnley. Now, for me, I thought this game was quite an interesting one, and it was a really interesting watch in my opinion, because you look at Luton Town, you can obviously see that they are missing some quite important players, and obviously they're still trying to sort of reshape their squad after relegation. Obviously they've lost some big names across the summer, most notably Ross Barkley. They've replaced him with Shandon Baptiste. Obviously they are missing some key players like the likes of Jacob Brown to injury at the moment, but you look at this Burnley side and it is still a very, very good side. You look at the likes of Vitinho, Foster up from Brownhill, Cullen, O'Shea, very, very good players. Now, there is reports that O'Shea could be moving on, but he left with a storm if he does move on, because he scored a brilliant header in the second half. I believe it was in the second half anyway. Absolute glancing header towards the far post. Really, really good goal. Now, for me, I didn't think Luton were as bad as the scoreline suggests. I just felt that Burnley were the much more clinical side, and I think that really obviously shows in the scoreline with it being 4-1. I felt like Burnley were getting into some really, really good areas, but I felt like Luton also did the same thing, but just weren't able to take their chances. Now, if we do go on to look at the statistics of this one and a little bit more detail, you can see that it was 6 shots on target for Burnley to 3, 2 big chances to 4, with 1 big missed chance for Luton and 2 big missed chances for Burnley. Now, the big thing about this game for me was it was very even when you look in terms of opportunities and things like that, but the big difference that we saw was that Burnley's forwards were ultimately able to take their chances, and it was a brilliant performance for Scott Parker. It was certainly a performance he would have been expecting. He maybe wasn't expecting, on the opening day, and they've done really, really well to get this far. They've done really, really well to put that performance in. And is that a sign of what's to come for this Burnley side? Are they going to go on and absolutely walk this division? If we go back a few years, how the Fulham side did it a few years ago, I think they only lost something like 3 or 4 games across the season. Might have been a couple more than that, but it certainly was a very, very interesting campaign. Well, Burnley end the weekend with a 4-1 win, and that is all for the Championship review. Now, we've gone through all the fixtures from start to finish this weekend. We'll be back at the end of the week for a game week preview for this weekend's upcoming games. Make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell and smash that like button to stay tuned for every single video so you know when it drops. Be sure to go and find me on TikTok, pictured here, and Twitter, pictured here. These are the places where I'll keep you all up to date with all my upcoming videos and my thoughts and feelings around the Formula 1 and football weekend.